Welcome to the channel. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. You can see in front of you I have a Heimdallr box, which means that this has to be the brand new release. And when I say brand new release, I mean more of a reissue. Yes, this is the Heimdallr H015 aka Ocean God aka the Godzilla homage, showing its admiration for the Seiko SBGA 405. And in the first iteration around 3 years ago, they absolutely nailed it. The watch was made so well and so faithfully, down to the smaller details like the hour markers, the hands, the casework was spectacular, and they even managed to get a leather strap remarkably close to that of the one used on the Seiko. So in order for me to review this watch, I had to rewatch my old review, and I managed to pick out some differences and slight improvements over the older one. So let's get to it. So specifications and dimensions are going to be on screen. Now there's no real changes to the specifications at all from the older one. Now the dimensions are also the same. You have a large chunky 44.5mm case. The case actually sticks out just ever so slight over the bezel, so the bezel is around 0.5 mm or a mil smaller. And then you get a sub 50mm lug to lug, which I think from the older one to the new one, there may be a very marginal reduction. The older model was closer to 50mm, and this is bang on at 49.5mm, and it makes all the difference. So this tells me that this reissue is almost exactly the same case from before, same specifications, the movement, which is a Seiko H015 automatic movement, and with one main visual difference being the addition of a H-link bracelet, which we're going to take a look at later. Now, we can't ignore that large, mesmerizing CNC cut gear shade dial. Now, had they reissued this with just a bog standard dial, because the older ones are still selling, I would not have given this watch a second look. But because of this CNC cut gear shade dial, that pattern is so stunning. And again, it reminds me of another Seiko, the SBGR 311, which also uses a similar pattern. And to be specific, that is wheel number 52 on the Spirograph handbook. They have produced this dial perfectly. You can look at this all day long. Now, they've produced these dials in two different colors. You get this cold dark gray dial and then that punchy blue version. And both, they look pretty good. Now, we have to take a closer look at this pattern. It really is very intricate and detailed, and it's got enough depth on the dial. It lets you see all those smaller crevices, and the closer you look, the more complexity you see. And as a result of those spirals, you end up with these tiny diamond-like shapes, which end up being faceted. And then it gives the design a lot more definition, as well as the light is always bouncing off those micro facets that have been carved into that dial. Now, the level of detail and the capability of Chinese dial makers is absolutely astonishing. Now, there is an elephant in the room, and that is the logo. I don't know what's happened with the zombie shark. That is what made Heimdallr so recognizable. And they seem to have gone with this Norse emblem for Heimdallr, which, while it may fit the theme or the name, but we're actually missing that identity. And I don't know if they ever will go back to that shark. And I can speak on behalf of the majority of fans that would definitely appreciate the zombie shark to make a comeback. Now, the pattern aside, the text that's printed on the dial also looks quite impressive, different to what we usually see. It's printed, but it's not like the majority of dials. It does look quite OEM, high quality, and maybe there's a laminated layer or a laminated finish over the top of that text, which gives it a very crisp appearance. Now, markers and hands, and I recall on the first one, which also had a cracking deep red dial, the markers and hands made a huge impact on me. The indices were bold, crisply finished and striking, and this uses the same indices with very slight differences. The new indices are slightly slimmer with a visibly thin polished outline, whereas the previous ones had a larger, they had more flared out bevels, ever so slightly, but it meant the indices were a little more prominent and slightly more enhanced. Even that flower at 12 o'clock, it had a larger polished bevel on either side, and the loom application also looks slightly thicker on the older dials. But let's wait and see the loom shot to see which one has stronger loom. So we can sort of see that with this CNC gear shade dial, they've had to make some very slight, very marginal compromises on the indices, which overall it doesn't overly bother me. And they've also improved something over the last one, and that has to be that mini hand. It's a subtle change, but one that makes quite a large difference. The hand is now longer, reaching just short of that minute track, and it looks much better that way with the right proportions. Now, the finishing is the same on these hands, just as good as they were 3 years ago. That's fantastic hour hand with the polished bevels, a proper arrowhead, and the long, sharp minute hand. Sandblasted finish on the hands, which again enhances those polished bevels further. And to finish it off, the brushed and polished top cap for that second hand, and that tiny red accent on the counterbalance of the hand. Lots of great details. So now time for the loom shot, and the loom not as good as the older one. I can see that clearly. It's not too far off as well. So you've got the handset is the same strength. However, on the dial, you've got slightly less layers, and I couldn't guess how many less layers. But the previous loom was much brighter, as I've seen it on my previous video, and you can tell these markers, the loom layering doesn't come across as thick, so just a very slight difference. You do still have that loomed ceramic bezel insert, so overall it's quite a nice visual, and it's going to last a fair while, but it's not going to be those old school monstrous looms that we used to get from Heimdallr and St. Martin, a few years back. It does have a 120 click bezel. And the older model bezel rotation wasn't that bad. It was a fairly smooth rotation, even though the problem here is that the bezel is actually fully polished, it's fully circular, there is zero grip. So the previous one counteracted this by making sure the bezel was quite light. You had a very slight inconsistency in the rotation itself, but it was still pretty good. This one though, after some wearing in, it has gotten a little better, but still is quite tight. To the point where you don't really want to mess with it because you hardly get any grip, and the more you mess with it, you end up just smearing the whole watch trying to get the bezel to rotate. So I wish they had made this just a little lighter, paid a bit more attention to this bezel, because if you are going to keep it rotating, it needs to have even just a slight bit of nailing around the side. That would have been great, just to give us some grip. Now there has been a slight improvement on the ceramic bezel insert as well. Rewatching that video on my last review, I noticed that I picked up a point on some of the numerals on the ceramic insert weren't crisp enough. They had some rough edges, which is more than likely down to a worn out tool. But these numerals on this bezel insert, very crisp, etched into the bezel perfectly. Now case wise, I said it's the same as the last one, so we don't need to spend too long talking about the case. Execution is brilliant, and I've got to shout out to Seiko here. How even are cases like this made? So unique. The imagination behind some of these Seiko watches has been incredible. It's a very unique case shape, particularly those faceted lugs, which give it a claw-like appearance, which first appeared on the Seiko Transocean, and it's also featured on my Grail watch, I have to say, the SBGA 403, the lion mane dial, which just so happens to have the same case as this version as well. And the execution is definitely praiseworthy. The facets they've captured with the crisp definition across the lug area, the side profile which features that scalloped polished facet. You've got consistent brushing, no sharp edges, and just executed so accurately. The case also features beveled undersides, which have been fully polished to give it that comfort on wrist. So this is like one of the reasons Heimdallr had so many fans in the early days of AliExpress, because they have made some incredible homages, arguably some of the best. Now the case also retains some function from the last one. The 7.4mm crown is large and very easy to use. A great smooth operation with zero grittiness, and there's no fiddling about. Yes, we are missing drill lugs on the case. God knows they had plenty of space to put some in there. And also moving on to the case back. Now the old one obviously had that zombie shark, which was a very cool logo now that we think about it. This one has some intricate rebranded Heimdallr logos in line with the Norse mythology, and it's also got a trident on there. Ocean God, so I guess they're trying to merge the two, and obviously your specifications around the case back. But I will say we need that shark back. So finally we get onto the bracelet, the actually only new thing on this reissue. Now this is like a second reason why I got this watch to review. I obviously had to see how the bracelet would be on the watch and also on wrist. Now looks wise, I think it's pretty good at matching the watch. This is where maybe they didn't look at that watches like the SBGA 403, or because Grand Seiko have made so many different versions of this case. Not only the Godzilla, there's other options there, and they all seem to have a quite a similar bracelet to this, meaning that it is a H-link system. Now you've got those flat end links which fit right into the case, giving it a semi-integrated feel. Now the finishing is very soft linear brushing, very consistent, smooth with those polished center links. Now I think what makes this bracelet better is that the links aren't just flat, you do have a slight curve on top. It gives it a smoother look and feel, but we have been shortchanged, I feel, with the use of split pins, which obviously means there's a lot of play in the bracelet, the side-to-side play. And I think something like this at this level definitely should have used screw pins. They have, however, upgraded the bracelet with a newer style of clasp, milled internals with a fold-over shell with a center raised detail. It features 6 micro adjustments, and yeah, it's a nice sleek clasp, but I think this watch definitely qualifies for an on-the-fly adjustable clasp. And Heimdallr need to now seriously pump some money into their brand if they really want to revive. And they've got to catch up to the specifications we have, on the better brands of AliExpress. Now, there's also a slight QC issue on the end links of the bracelet. The one end link on the far side of the case has a fairly nice and even fit. There's an even gap. There's no raised edges. Sits pretty flush. And also the crease on the actual end link matches up near enough with the line that you see on the lugs. Now, when we turn the watch over to the near side end link, this is where you can see it's a little rough. The gapping is definitely not as even as it is on the other side, and you also have the end link not sitting quite flush, and as well as that crease sits much higher compared to those lines on those lugs. So a slight QC issue on the end link there. I mean, it's not perfect, but what it does do is give you those female end links, which look how much they articulate under the watch case. This does absolute wonders for the watch on your wrist. It makes the watch far more accessible to more wrist sizes. For example, on my 6.5-inch wrist, it sits very nicely central, and those female end links means that the lugs sit right on the edges of my wrist. And yes, it is a large watch. You're not going to get away from that. It is meant to have presence with that large bezel and the larger diameter. The sharp angled facets on the case and bracelet allow this to wear really well, which is why overall I do really like it. You will feel some top heaviness the way the case is. You can't escape it. It's quite substantial. The big watch feel that I do talk about, the watch sort of engulfs your wrist, but it has magnificent presence, and I think it does look incredible. So overall, yeah, I am excited that Heimdallr is starting to get active again. But if they are going to thrive, they need to inject some serious cash into the higher level of specifications and work on that end level QC and finishing on their watches. They have to do quite a lot to keep up with the standard that we're getting now from the higher end brands, or the mid-range to higher end brands. And overall, I'd say, yeah, it's a great reissue. Some things were marginally better on the previous one, but this newer one has that amazing dial and bracelet combination. It definitely works. But that dial is stunning. You have to see it in person. Just so intricate, definitely is going to stand out on your wrist. So that's it for me today, guys. Please let me know your thoughts below in the comment section, and I'm going to see you later on the next video. Thank you all for watching.